David stood at the entrance of the galactic military base, his heart racing. The base stretched out before him, vast and imposing, filled with towering structures that seemed to touch the sky. It was a place where only the strongest and most capable survived, a training ground for soldiers from all corners of the galaxy. This was his new home. As a human, David knew he was different, but that only made him more determined to prove himself. He had been chosen as part of a new initiative to integrate Earth's military into the larger intergalactic force. The task was simple in theory: unite the human race with alien species to form a stronger military presence. But for David, it was far from simple. He had seen the incredible warriors who made up this force, strong, fast, and skilled beyond anything Earth had ever known. Many of them were aliens who could do things he couldn't even begin to understand. David was a rookie, fresh from Earth's military academy. He had proven himself in his own world, but here, in the vast universe of trained warriors, he was nothing more than a rookie, a small fish in a big pond. He knew it, and he wasn't sure how long he would last in this environment. The walls of the base hummed with activity as soldiers moved from one area to another, preparing for their next mission. David felt small in the midst of it all. His uniform, neatly pressed and new, seemed to be a symbol of how much he still had to learn. As he walked down the long corridor, his boots clicked against the metal floor, a sound that seemed to echo. Through the halls, David had been briefed on the hierarchy of the force. At the top was Captain Zira, an alien commander whose reputation was both feared and respected. She was known for being a fierce leader, cold, calculating, and ruthless in battle. She had earned the respect of every soldier who served under her. And now, David was one of those soldiers. He had heard stories about Captain Zira. Some said she was the most skilled warrior in the galaxy, capable of defeating entire armies with just a few well-placed strikes. Others whispered about her icy demeanor, how she kept herself emotionally distant from everyone around her. There were rumors that no one had ever gotten close to her, not in friendship, not in battle, not even as a mentor. David couldn't help but feel a little nervous. He was just an earthling among beings who had abilities that far outstripped anything he had ever imagined. What could he possibly bring to the table? What could he do that would impress someone like Captain Zira? As he walked into the training area, the sight that greeted him was overwhelming. Soldiers were sparring in pairs, using both weapons and hand-to-hand combat to hone their skills. The air was thick with the sound of grunts, clashing metal, and the occasional shout. The intensity in the room was palpable, and David felt a surge of excitement mixed with dread. This was where he would prove himself. He spotted Captain Zira standing near the center of the room, observing the training. She was tall, with sharp features and an air of authority that was impossible to ignore. Her uniform fit her perfectly, the insignia of her rank gleaming brightly on her chest. Her expression was unreadable, her eyes scanning the room with a calm, calculating gaze. David swallowed his nerves and approached the training area, where a large group of recruits was gathered. The other soldiers looked at him with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. They had all been through the grueling training before, and now a human soldier was joining their ranks. It was clear they didn't expect much from him. "Form up!" shouted one of the senior officers, and the recruits quickly fell into line. David did the same, standing at the back of the group. He couldn't help but feel out of place, but he was determined not to let his nerves show. He had made it this far, and he wasn't going to back down now. Captain Zira stepped forward, her gaze sweeping over the recruits. "Today we'll be testing your combat skills," she said, her voice cold and firm. "I expect nothing less than perfection. Do not disappoint me." David's heart skipped a beat. Her presence alone was enough to make anyone feel small. But there was something else about her, something that made her more than just a leader. It was the way she carried herself, the way she commanded attention without even trying. It was as if she had the entire galaxy in her grasp. She turned her attention to the recruits. You will be paired up with another soldier and engage in a sparring match. I want to see how well you can adapt to combat situations. Show me what you're capable of. David's eyes narrowed as he tried to read the expressions of the others. They all seemed confident, ready to face whatever challenge was ahead. He, on the other hand, had no idea what to expect. He wasn't used to fighting, alongside beings with such extraordinary abilities. When his name was called, David stepped forward and stood at attention. His opponent was a tall, blue-skinned alien with 4 arms. The alien's eyes glowed with intensity as he sized David up. There was no doubt that this soldier was far more experienced than him. David took a deep breath, reminding himself to stay calm. He had trained for this. He had fought in simulations back on Earth, and although they weren't as challenging as this, they had prepared him for the basics. But he knew this would be different. He had no idea what kind of moves his opponent might use. Begin! Captain Zera's voice rang out, and the sparring session began. The blue-skinned alien moved first, rushing at David with incredible speed. David barely had time to react as the alien's multiple arms reached for him, attempting to grab him. In a powerful hold, David dodged to the side, narrowly avoiding the attack. His opponent's speed was staggering, and David's heart raced as he tried to think of a counterattack. But instead of freezing, David focused on what he knew. He didn't have the speed or strength to match his opponent, but he could use his agility. He ducked and weaved, using his smaller frame to his advantage. The alien swung again, but David was already rolling out of the way. Good, Captain Zera's voice came from the side. But you need to do more than dodge. David's mind raced. He couldn't afford to keep running. He had to strike back somehow. Just as the alien reached for him again, David spotted an opening. With a quick movement, he grabbed the alien's wrist and used its momentum to throw him off balance. The alien stumbled, and David seized the moment. He moved swiftly, locking the alien in a hold that forced him to the ground. The room fell silent for a moment. David's heart pounded in his chest as he stood over his opponent, breathless but triumphant. The alien looked up at him, surprised by the human's unexpected move. Captain Zera's gaze lingered on him for a moment longer than usual before. She nodded once. Not bad, she said, her voice as cold as ever. David stood tall, but inside he was already thinking ahead. This was just the beginning. He had proven himself for now, but the real challenge lay ahead. Captain Zera had noticed him, even if only for a moment. That was enough for him to keep pushing forward. He would prove to her and to the entire force that humanity had more to offer than they realized. David's heart pounded in his chest as he stood in the briefing room, surrounded by the other soldiers of the intergalactic military force. The room was silent, except for the low hum of the holographic displays that hovered in the center. Captain Zera stood at the front, her posture commanding, her face as serious as ever. Her eyes scanned the room, making sure everyone was paying attention. Today was his first real mission. The reality of it all was beginning to sink in. This wasn't a training exercise. This was a real-life operation to capture a rogue warlord named Torak, who had been terrorizing the outer rim of the galaxy. His forces were strong, ruthless, and well-equipped. The mission would be dangerous, and not everyone would make it out alive. David was nervous, but he was determined not to show it. He had been waiting for this moment ever since he arrived at the base. The soldiers around him seemed calm, but he could tell they were just as aware of the risks. Each of them had their own reputation to protect, and Captain Zera's team was known for being the best. The pressure was on. Torak has been attacking civilian colonies, forcing them to surrender or face total destruction. Our mission is to stop him and bring him in alive. Captain Zera's voice broke the silence. We move in 20 minutes. Be prepared for anything. David nodded, trying to steady his nerves. He had read all the mission briefs and studied the enemy's tactics. Torak was a dangerous and unpredictable leader. His forces were made up of mercenaries from across the galaxy, each one a skilled fighter in their own right. David's role in the mission was to provide support. He would be part of the backup team, covering the main assault force as they breached Torak's heavily fortified base. David was nervous about being stuck in a secondary role. He had trained to be a frontline soldier, but here, in the real world, things were different. He was still new, still learning. He had to prove himself to everyone, especially to Captain Zira, who had watched him closely since his sparring match. As the mission briefing ended, the soldiers began to file out of the room, preparing for departure. David followed the group to the hangar, where their transport ships waited. The ship was sleek and powerful, designed for quick strikes and rapid evacuations. The soldiers climbed aboard, and David took his place in the back with a few others. His heart still racing. The flight to Torak's stronghold was long, filled with silence and anticipation. David looked around at the other soldiers. Some were checking their weapons, while others stared out of the windows, lost in their thoughts. Captain Zira was seated at the front, her face stoic as ever. She didn't speak to anyone, her focus entirely on the mission ahead. David wanted to ask her for advice, to seek reassurance, but he didn't. He knew she wouldn't offer any. Zira was a leader who believed in action, not words. She would only judge him on what he did, not what he said. He would have to prove himself, not with words, but with his actions on the battlefield. As the ship approached the target zone, the crew began to prepare. The base was hidden deep within a mountain range, surrounded by dense forests. Torak's forces had set up advanced sensors to detect any incoming ships, so the team would have to land several miles away and approach on foot. David's stomach turned as the ship began its descent. He had never been on a mission of this scale before. Sure, he had trained for this moment, but the reality of it all was different. He could feel the weight of his weapon, the armor on his body, the responsibility on his shoulders. He wasn't just a recruit anymore. Today, he would have to prove he belonged here. The ship touched down with a slight jolt, and the soldiers quickly moved into position. They exited the ship and began the trek through the dense forest, their movements swift and coordinated. David stuck close to the team, doing his best to keep up with the others. The journey was tense, with every crack of a branch or rustle of leaves making them all more alert. They knew Torak's forces could be anywhere. Captain Zira led the way, her eyes scanning the environment as she walked. She moved like a shadow, every step calculated and precise. David admired her skill, but at the same time, he felt the pressure mounting. He was supposed to be part of this team, but he was still unsure if he was ready to handle the heat of battle. After hours of navigating through the dense terrain, they finally reached the perimeter of Torak's base. The structure was massive, built into the side of the mountain. Heavy turrets and shield generators surrounded it, and several guards patrolled the area. This was where the real challenge would begin. Captain Zira turned to the team, her voice a low whisper. The base is heavily fortified. We'll split into two groups. The main assault team will breach the front, while the secondary team will provide support from the rear. Stay sharp. David nodded as he joined his team. The two groups split up, each moving toward their assigned positions. David's group took the rear, where they would disable the shield generators that protected the base from airstrikes and artillery. Their job was crucial. Without the shields down, the main assault team wouldn't stand a chance. David's heart raced as they made their way to the shield generators. His palms were sweaty, and he tried to focus on his task. He knew he couldn't afford to make a mistake. If he did, it would put the entire team in jeopardy. As they reached the shield generators, David's team moved into position, taking cover behind a series of large rocks. The sound of blaster fire echoed in the distance as the main assault team engaged the enemy. It was time. David, along with the rest of his team, moved quickly to disable the shield generators. But as they worked, things began to go wrong. A group of Torax soldiers appeared, outnumbering them. David's heart skipped a beat as the enemy opened fire. His team returned fire, but the situation was quickly spiraling out of control. "David, move to the flank!" Captain Zira's voice rang through his comms. David's blood ran cold, but he obeyed without hesitation. He sprinted to the side, firing his weapon as he went. His heart pounded in his chest, the adrenaline pumping through his veins. This was real. This was no simulation. As he dove into cover behind a large rock, he saw Captain Zira leading the charge, taking down enemy soldiers with unmatched precision. Her calm, calculated movements were everything David aspired to be. She was a true leader, someone who led by example, and now he had to do the same. With the shields down and the enemy troops scattered, the assault team moved in to breach the base. David's team had completed their task, but the real fight was just beginning. The mission wasn't over yet, and there was still much to prove. As the mission continued, David realized something important. He might not have been at the front of the fight, but he had contributed. He had done his part, and that was all that mattered. Today, he was one step closer to earning his place among the elite. The mission had been a success, at least in the eyes of the higher-ups. Torax base had been captured, his forces scattered, and the galaxy was one step closer to peace. But for David, the victory felt incomplete. He had done his part, taken down enemies, protected his team, and followed orders. But now, as the operation came to an end, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. David had proven himself capable, and Captain Zira had even acknowledged his efforts with a nod of approval. Yet despite that, she remained distant. In all the chaos of the mission, she had never once spoken to him beyond orders or brief comments. She was the commanding officer, and he was just one of many soldiers under her command. He had expected that, of course, but a part of him couldn't help but wish for more. He had started to admire Zira in ways he couldn't quite explain. Her strength, her calm in the face of danger, and her unwavering focus in battle all made her seem untouchable. But it wasn't just that. There was something else about her that intrigued him. Despite her cold exterior, there were moments when David thought he saw a flicker of something beneath the surface, a hint of something human, something vulnerable. He had seen it during the mission, a brief moment when she hesitated after issuing an order. It was so fleeting that he almost missed it. But it was there. And it made him wonder if Captain Zira was as untouchable as she appeared, or if there was more to her than met the eye. In the days that followed the mission, David kept his distance. He did his job, trained with the others, and kept his focus on becoming a better soldier. But in the back of his mind, he couldn't help but think about Zira. He had a feeling that the more he observed her, the more he would understand her, if only she would let him. One evening, after a long day of training, David found himself in the mess hall grabbing a quick meal. The room was filled with soldiers, some chatting in low voices while others ate in silence, their minds still focused on the mission. David sat at a table by himself, poking at his food without much interest. It was hard to enjoy anything with so much on his mind. He glanced up to see Captain Zira entering the mess hall, her eyes scanning the room as she made her way to the counter to get her meal. She moved with the same confidence that she always did, her posture straight, her face unreadable. David watched her for a moment, then quickly turned his attention back to his food. He didn't want to draw attention to himself, especially not when it came to her. But as luck would have it, Zira's gaze shifted in his direction, and for a brief moment, their eyes met. There was a flicker of something there, a recognition, maybe. She didn't say anything, but her gaze lingered just a little longer than usual. David's heart skipped a beat, and he quickly looked down, his cheeks flushing slightly. He didn't know why, but he felt a sudden wave of self-consciousness. He hadn't expected her to notice him like that. Zira didn't approach him, though. Instead, she grabbed her meal and walked to an empty table in the corner, sitting down, alone. David couldn't help but feel a pang of disappointment. He had expected nothing more than the usual silence, but for some reason he felt like he had missed an opportunity. The rest of the evening passed quietly. David finished his meal, left the mess hall and returned to his quarters. But as he lay in bed staring at the ceiling, he couldn't stop thinking about that moment. Why had Zira looked at him like that? Was it just a passing glance, or had there been something more? He wasn't sure, but it made him feel uneasy. He wasn't used to these kinds of thoughts, especially about someone like her. The next few days were uneventful. David continued with his training, working on his combat skills, learning alien technology, and adjusting to the life of a soldier in an intergalactic force. The other soldiers treated him like a peer, but there was always a clear divide. They were experienced, having fought in countless battles across the galaxy. He, on the other hand, was still learning, still trying to prove that humanity had something to offer beyond the Earth. But as much as he tried to focus on the mission at hand, his thoughts kept drifting back to Captain Zira. He watched her from a distance as she led her team with precision, never faltering, never letting her emotions show. But David could see the small cracks in her armor. He could see how the weight of command seemed to wear on her. The way she carried herself, always holding back, always controlling every emotion. He couldn't help but feel sympathy for her, even if he didn't fully understand it. One day, during a routine weapons drill, David found himself paired with Zira. He had been working with the other soldiers, but now he was standing face to face with her in the training arena. His heart raced as he tried to calm his nerves. He had trained for this, but sparring with her was different. She was his superior, and she had more skill and experience than anyone he had ever faced. "Ready?" she asked, her voice calm as usual. David nodded, trying to keep his cool. He knew this wasn't just another drill. It was an opportunity. If he could hold his own against Zira, even for a few moments, it would show that he had what it took to be part of the team. The fight began, and immediately Zira's movements were lightning fast. She struck with precision, her attacks swift and calculated. David dodged, blocked, and countered as best as he could, but he knew he was outmatched. She was a force to be reckoned with, a warrior beyond compare. Yet there was something about the way she fought that made David feel like she was holding back. As the fight progressed, David began to notice a small change in Zira's behavior. For the first time, her expressions shifted slightly. Her eyes narrowed in concentration, and there was a brief flicker of frustration when David managed to land a hit. It was subtle, but David noticed it. He wasn't just facing an unshakable leader. He was facing someone who, despite her calm exterior, cared about winning, about being the best. With one final move, David launched himself at her, using the momentum of his body to push her back. She stumbled just for a moment, but it was enough for David to land another hit. It wasn't much, but it was enough to prove he had the potential to hold his own. Zira stepped back, her eyes locking with his. There was no smile, no praise, but for the briefest of moments, there was a flicker of something in her eyes. Approval? Respect? It was hard to tell, but whatever it was, it made David's heart race even faster. "You're improving," she said simply, her voice as cold and professional as ever. David stood there, catching his breath, and nodded. It wasn't much, but it was a start. He wasn't just the rookie anymore. He was starting to earn his place. The days following the sparring match were filled with tension, both in the air and inside David's mind. It wasn't that he was scared of Captain Zira. It was the opposite. He had begun to admire her, to respect her, and in some ways, he found himself drawn to her. But there was a wall between them, an unspoken barrier that he couldn't quite get past. Zira was the leader, the one who gave the orders, and he was just another soldier under her command. Despite his success in sparring, he knew that respect alone wouldn't make him a part of her inner circle. The mission with Torak had proven his worth, and Zira's brief acknowledgement had been enough to give him a sense of pride. Yet he still found himself at a distance, unable to bridge the gap between them. She had praised his skills in battle, but there was no personal connection, no indication that she saw him as more than just a soldier. It was the next mission, one that seemed less dangerous on the surface, that would change things. The base had received word of a hostile alien group in a neighboring sector, a group of mercenaries that had taken control of a planet that was of strategic importance. Their mission was simple: neutralize the threat and restore order. But as David and the team prepared for the operation, something felt different. There was a palpable unease in the air. The team boarded their transport ships, ready for action. Zira was once again at the front, her face set, in a stern expression as she went over the mission details. But as the ship took off and ascended into the deep blue sky of the planet's atmosphere, something unusual happened. The ship jolted unexpectedly, and the entire crew was thrown off balance. The ship's sensors screamed in alarm, signaling an unexpected interference in the system. A large, cloaked vessel had suddenly appeared out of nowhere, blocking their path. It wasn't just a rogue ship. It was a large, heavily armed vessel with advanced technology that even the intergalactic military had never encountered. "Everyone, brace yourselves," Zira's voice came through the comms, calm as ever. "We're going to have to fight our way through this." David's mind raced. The ship had just appeared out of thin air, and now they were in the middle of a battle they hadn't anticipated. The crew scrambled to prepare for the worst, but before anyone could react, Zira turned to David. "You're with me, David," she ordered. "We need to disable their weapons systems. The rest of the team will handle the ground forces. Move quickly and stay sharp." David felt a rush of excitement, mixed with fear. This was a chance to prove himself again, but it also meant being in close proximity to Zira, facing danger side by side with the woman he admired. The thought both thrilled and terrified him. They quickly suited up, making their way to the ship's weapons bay. The rest of the team was already in place, preparing for the firefight that was about to ensue. As they moved down the hall, Zira glanced at David. For the first time, there was a hint of something softer in her eyes, a look that suggested she wasn't just concerned about the mission, but about the soldiers she was leading. "This isn't like the last mission," Zira said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Stay close and do exactly as I say. If we don't stop that ship's weapons, we'll be sitting ducks." David nodded, his heart pounding in his chest. This was the real deal. He had no idea what was waiting for them outside, but he had to focus. He couldn't afford to let his nerves get the best of him. Not now, not when Zira was counting on him. They reached the weapons bay, where a small team of soldiers was preparing the ship's defensive systems. Zira took charge immediately, issuing orders and coordinating the team's efforts. David followed her every move, trying to stay focused on the task at hand. "We're going to have to disable their targeting systems from the outside," Zira explained. "David, you're on point. Get to the outer hull and plant the disabling device. I'll cover you." David's mind raced. The ship they were facing had advanced shields and weapons, but Zira had devised a plan. If they could disable the targeting systems, the enemy ship wouldn't be able to lock onto them. It was a risky move, but it was their only chance. The atmosphere on the ship grew tense as they prepared to board the enemy vessel. The ship had docked with the massive cloaked vessel, and now David and Zira were about to make their move. As they walked down the airlock, David's heart pounded in his chest. He was about to face an unknown enemy, and the pressure to succeed weighed heavily on him. Once outside the ship, the sight that greeted David was both terrifying and awe-inspiring. The enemy vessel loomed large in front of him, a dark and menacing presence. The hull was covered in strange alien markings, and the weapons mounted on its exterior seemed far more advanced than anything David had ever seen. He turned to Zira, who was already moving ahead. She didn't speak, but her eyes locked onto his, and for a moment there was a shared understanding between them. They were in this together, no matter the outcome. Zira moved forward, placing her hand on the hull of the enemy ship. A faint energy field crackled beneath her touch as she activated the device that would allow them to disable the targeting system. "Now, David," she commanded, "place the charge." David stepped forward, positioning himself carefully. He could feel the vibrations of the enemy ship beneath his feet, the sense of imminent danger all around him. He quickly planted the device, securing it with practiced ease. The ship's weapons would be neutralized once the device activated, but there was no time to waste. Just as he finished setting the charge, an alarm blared across the ship. The enemy forces had detected their presence. David's heart skipped a beat as the sound of footsteps echoed through the ship's corridors. "They were coming! Zira!" David called out, his voice urgent. "We need to move!" Zira didn't hesitate. With a swift motion, she grabbed his arm and pulled him toward the ship's hatch. The two of them sprinted back to the airlock, the enemy close behind. As they entered the hatch, Zira sealed it with a single push of a button. "We've got what we needed," Zira said, her voice steady. "Now we get back to the ship." David's breath came in short bursts as they made their way back to the shuttle, the reality of what had just happened sinking in. They had succeeded in their mission, but it had been closer than either of them had anticipated. For a brief moment, David had feared they wouldn't make it out alive. As they returned to the transport ship and took off, Zira gave him a small, approving nod. It wasn't much, but it was more than he had expected. David stood there, catching his breath, a sense of pride building within him. He had done it. He had fought beside Zira, and together they had succeeded. But there was something more, something deeper than just the mission. For the first time, David felt like he had earned a place at her side, not just as a soldier, but as a partner in battle. After the successful mission against the enemy vessel, the tension between David and Captain Zira seemed to shift. It wasn't something either of them acknowledged directly, but the way they interacted had subtly changed. The wall that had always existed between them, built by rank and distance, had cracked just a little, creating an opening for something more. For the first time, David felt like he was truly a part of the team, not just an outsider trying to prove himself. Over the next few days, things at the base returned to their usual routine. The soldiers were debriefed on the mission, and the team received their next set of orders. The success of the mission was still fresh in their minds, but, as time passed, it became just another part of their lives. Yet for David, it had been something more. It had marked a turning point in his understanding of who Captain Zira really was. Zira had always been a mystery to him. From the moment he arrived at the base, she had been this unapproachable figure. Calm, composed, and distant. She was a leader who gave orders, not explanations, and her presence commanded respect. But after the mission, David began to see another side of her, one that was less about being in control and more about being human. It happened in the quiet moments, the ones when Zira let her guard down, even if only for a second. After every mission, when the team would return to the base, she would always retreat to her quarters. She rarely socialized with the soldiers after their duties were done, but on one evening, after the enemy ship had been disabled, she did something unexpected. David had just finished cleaning his gear when he saw her sitting alone in the mess hall. He had expected her to be in her usual spot at the far end of the room, away from the others. But this time, she was sitting near the window, staring out into the vast expanse of space. Her usual stoic expression was gone, replaced by something softer, a look of contemplation, almost as if she were lost in thought. David hesitated. He had always respected her space, but there was something about the way she looked tonight that made him wonder if she needed company. Taking a deep breath, he decided to approach. As he walked toward her, she didn't seem to notice him at first, but when he was only a few steps away, she looked up and met his eyes. There was no command in her gaze, no sternness, just a quiet acknowledgement. "David," she said, her voice as calm as always. "I didn't expect to see you here." David took a seat across from her, unsure of what to say. He had never seen Zira like this before. There was no mission to focus on, no strategy to plan. It was just the two of them, sitting in silence, with nothing but the sound of the ship's hum to fill the quiet. "You did well today?" she continued, her voice still steady but with a hint of something that David couldn't quite place. "You've been improving, I noticed it." David smiled, grateful for the praise. "Thanks, Captain. I couldn't have done it without your leadership." Zira nodded, but her gaze remained distant, still focused on the stars outside the window. It was as if she were seeing something far beyond the ship, something far beyond the mission. David could sense that there was more to her than she let on, something she kept hidden deep inside. "I'm just trying to do my job," she said, after a pause. "I don't need anyone's approval." David's brow furrowed slightly. "But you do want it, don't you? Approval, I mean." He hadn't meant to sound bold, but the words were out before he could stop them. Zira's eyes flicked to him, and for a moment, the walls around her softened. "I don't need anyone's approval because I can't afford to rely on it," she said, her voice quieter now. "If I let myself care about what others think, I wouldn't be able to make the decisions I need to. Not as a leader." David nodded, understanding the weight of her words. He had always known that leadership came with sacrifices, but hearing it from Zira herself made it all the more real. She had built her walls to protect herself, to shield herself from the burden of caring too much. But David wondered, did it ever get lonely, standing so far apart from everyone else? He decided to take a chance. "You don't always have to carry the weight alone, you know," he said softly. "We're a team. You've got us." Zira looked at him for a long moment, and for the first time, David saw something other than the calm, impenetrable leader. There was a flicker of vulnerability in her eyes just for an instant before it was gone. She looked away quickly, returning her gaze to the stars outside. "You're right," she said quietly. "But it's hard, David. The moment I let my guard down, everything becomes harder. I can't afford to be weak." David didn't know what to say at first. He had never seen Zara like this, and it made him realize how much she had been holding inside all this time. She wasn't just a commander. She was a person, someone with her own fears and doubts. And, in that moment, David saw the cracks in her armor, the very armor that had made her so unreachable to him. "I understand," he said finally, "but it doesn't make you weak to rely on others. It just makes you human." Zira's lips pressed together and she turned her gaze back to him. There was a flicker of something in her eyes, something that might have been gratitude, or perhaps even something deeper. But she didn't say anything in response. Instead, she looked down at the table, her hands resting in front of her. For a long time, neither of them spoke. There was something comforting in the silence, something that allowed both of them to just be. In that quiet moment, the distance between them seemed to shrink just a little. They weren't just soldier and commander anymore. They were two people, facing the weight of their roles and responsibilities, but also sharing a moment of understanding. David felt something shift inside him, a deeper respect for Zira, not just as a leader, but as a person. He understood now that there was more to her than the cold, distant exterior she had shown to everyone. And in a way, he realized that perhaps the greatest thing he could offer her was not just his loyalty as a soldier, but his friendship as someone who understood the weight she carried. "I should go," Zira said, breaking the silence. "I still have work to do." David nodded, standing up. "I'll see you tomorrow, Captain." She stood as well, her usual commanding presence returning. But this time, there was something different in the way she looked at him. A quiet recognition, an unspoken understanding. "Good night, David," she said. her voice softer than usual. As David left the mess hall and headed back to his quarters, he couldn't help but feel a sense of hope. He had stepped closer to Zara, not through force but through understanding, and for the first time since he arrived, he felt like he truly belonged, like he had earned a place not just in the team, but in her life, even if only a small part of it. The mission to disable the rogue alien forces was over. The team had returned to base, and the success of their mission was hailed as a victory for the entire galaxy. But for David, this was more than just another successful operation. It marked the beginning of a new chapter, not just in his career as a soldier, but in his personal growth and understanding of his place in the universe. As the days passed, the quiet moments with Captain Zira continued to linger in David's mind. After their conversation in the mess hall, things had shifted. There was still a distance between them, but it was no longer the cold, unapproachable barrier it once was. There was respect now, mutual respect, and for the first time, David felt like he was truly part of the team. Captain Zira's leadership remained as commanding and unyielding as ever. She continued to make the tough calls, to lead her team with the precision and determination that had earned her the reputation of being the best. But there were moments when David saw the cracks in her armor, moments when she allowed herself to relax, even if just for a moment. It was in those moments that David felt a deeper connection to her, a sense that she wasn't just a leader, but a person who, like him, carried the weight of responsibility and duty. But despite their growing understanding, the challenges they faced were far from over. The galaxy was full of dangers, and as the team prepared for their next mission, David knew that the stakes would only get higher. Their next objective was to infiltrate a hidden alien base, believed to be manufacturing illegal weapons of mass destruction. The mission was dangerous, and it would require every soldier's full attention and skill. David had spent the past few days in intense training, working to sharpen his combat skills and learn more about the alien technology that he would face. The base was located on a remote planet surrounded by dense forests and mountainous terrain. It was a place that would test not only their physical abilities but their mental toughness as well. The team assembled in the briefing room, where Captain Zira stood at the front, her expression focused and serious. The atmosphere in the room was tense as everyone knew how critical this mission was. They had been briefed on the details, the location, the enemy forces, the objectives, but David could feel the pressure building. This wasn't just another operation, this was personal. As Zira spoke, her voice calm but commanding, David couldn't help but notice the subtle shift in her demeanor. She wasn't the same as she had been in the earlier missions. There was something different now, a hint of vulnerability, a softening around the edges. He wondered if it was because of their growing bond, or if it was simply the weight of the mission at hand. Either way, he knew that this mission would be another test for both of them. David's role on the mission was clear. He would once again be part of the secondary team tasked with disabling the enemy's communication systems and clearing the way for the main assault team. But this time, he wasn't just a rookie. He was a trusted member of the team. His actions, his decisions would make a difference. He was no longer just proving his worth. He was a vital part of their success. The transport ship took off, carrying the team toward the alien base. As they flew through the vast expanse of space, David couldn't shake the feeling that something was different this time. There was a sense of urgency in the air, a sense that the stakes were higher than ever before. He could see it in Zira's eyes, the way she studied the mission data, the way her hands gripped the armrest of her seat. She was the same as always, but there was a subtle change in her focus, a deeper intensity. When they arrived on the planet, the team moved quickly and efficiently. The dense forests surrounding the base made it difficult to approach, but Zira led them through the terrain with the skill of a seasoned commander. They moved like shadows, silent and swift, each soldier doing their part to stay hidden from enemy. Patrols. David kept his focus, aware of every rustle of leaves and every shift in the wind. As they neared the base, David's pulse quickened. He knew what was at stake here. The illegal weapons being manufactured at the base were more than just a threat to the galaxy's security. They were a potential game changer. If they couldn't stop this operation, the consequences would be dire. Zira turned to him, her eyes meeting his for the briefest of moments. "Stay sharp, David," she said quietly, her voice a low whisper. "This is it." David nodded, his nerves steady. He had trained for this. He had fought beside her before, and he knew what he was capable of. This mission would be no different. They would succeed, together. The infiltration went smoothly at first. The enemy guards were few, and the team moved swiftly to disable the communication systems and breach the perimeter. But as they entered the inner sanctum of the base, things took a sudden and unexpected turn. An alarm blared, and the sound of enemy soldiers echoing through the halls sent a jolt of adrenaline through the team. The main assault team, which had been stationed outside, was already engaging the enemy, but the fight was growing more intense by the second. David and his team had to move quickly, and the pressure was on. Zira's voice came over the comms, calm and authoritative. "We need to disable their main weapons facility. David, take the lead. Get to the central core and shut it down." David's heart raced. This was the moment he had been waiting for, the moment where his actions would determine the outcome of the mission. There was no room for hesitation. He had to move, and he had to move fast. The base's interior was a maze of dark corridors and high-tech defenses. But David was focused. He had trained for this, and now every step he took brought him closer to the heart of the enemy operation. His mind raced as he calculated the quickest route to the central core, making sure to avoid enemy patrols and disable any traps along the way. When they finally reached the central core, David could feel the weight of the mission pressing down on him. The facility was heavily guarded, but they had made it this far. He could see Zira ahead, directing the team with precision as they fought off enemy soldiers. The core itself was surrounded by an intricate security system, but David knew exactly what to do. With a steady hand, he accessed the terminal and began the shutdown sequence. Almost there. He muttered under his breath, his fingers flying over the keys. But just as he was about to complete the sequence, the ground shook violently beneath them. The facility had gone into lockdown. The security system activated, and the doors slammed shut, trapping them inside. David's heart skipped a beat as he realized they were running out of time. Zira's voice crackled through the comms. "David, get that core shut down now. We don't have much time." With every ounce of focus he had left, David completed the shutdown sequence. The facility powered down, and the danger of the weapons was neutralized. But they weren't out of danger yet. The mission had been completed, but the escape was just beginning. Zira and the team fought their way to the extraction point, with David by her side. This time, it wasn't just about following orders. It was about working together, relying on each other to make it out alive. As they boarded the transport ship and took off into space, David looked at Zira one last time. There was a sense of pride in her eyes, but also something more, something unspoken. Together they had faced down the unknown, and together they had emerged victorious. David knew that this was only the beginning. He had earned his place, not just in the team, but in Zira's world. And that meant more than he could ever put into words.